April 1910. Mount Rainier, Washington. The snow was melting early that year. Streams trickled through fractured rock, and the evergreens began shedding branches that had slept too long beneath the ice. Dr. David Harrison, age 67, a retired internist, left his cabin in Enumclaw at 5:40 a.m. He carried a small canvas pack, GPS, a survival knife, and an old leather notebook he'd kept since his residency days in Seattle. His planned route, an 8.2-mile hike along the southern ridge of the Ohanepekosh Gorge, a trail he had walked hundreds of times before. But this time he didn't return. No call. No distress signal. Only silence. And his Subaru Forester, abandoned in the national park's lot. Locked. No keys. His family reported him missing. Pierce County authorities launched a search and rescue operation. 2 weeks later, his backpack was found wedged against slick stone nearly 4 miles off the main trail. Inside, a GPS unit with the battery removed, a folded trail map oriented the wrong way, and his notebook, its final page torn out. No blood, no drag marks, no signs of a struggle. The case was closed under 2 words: unexplained disappearance. Cascades. 4 years later, June 2022, a wildlife group monitoring beaver activity in the Beaver Valley wetland, nearly 15 miles from the site of David's disappearance, discovered something hard embedded inside a dam. When they pulled it from the mud and debris, they contacted police. Forensic technicians retrieved a waterproof bag, warped and torn at the corner, filled with soggy documents. One item stood out: an ID card, ink nearly faded, but still legible. David Allen Harrison, M.D. What had happened to the doctor that morning? Who erased the traces? And why was the final page of his journal, the one someone risked everything to tear out, the key to everything that followed? April Lizatine, 2018. Enumclaw, Washington. The sky was unusually clear. Cold spring sunlight touched the rooftops, the tree canopies, and the worn wooden steps of the Harrison cabin. Laura Harrison woke at 6:12 a.m., expecting to hear her husband moving in the kitchen as usual. But the kitchen was cold. The coffee maker was off. No sound of ceramic on granite. No radio humming quietly in the background. She stepped onto the porch. The Subaru was gone. On the kitchen counter, a small handwritten note: Ohanepekosh, South Trail. Back before noon. Don't wait for lunch. The handwriting was firm. The O's still squared like he used to sign prescriptions. But something about the note unsettled her. Not because he was gone, but because he never detailed his trail route like that. For a hiker as seasoned as David, getting lost was unthinkable. And David, a former emergency response physician who served during 9/11, lived by one rule: precision saves lives. By midday, Laura was anxious but composed. But at 2:10 p.m., 2.5 hours past his promised return, she called him. The phone was off. 3 calls, then 5, then 9. No answer, no signal, no response. At 4:30 p.m., she drove straight to the Mount Rainier Ranger Station. A staff member confirmed. A gray Subaru had been parked since early morning and hadn't left. A patrol passed the lot at 1 p.m., but saw nothing unusual. Laura continued driving toward the trailhead. She knew this route. They'd walked it together dozens of times. On quiet weekends, during summer festivals, sometimes just to talk. But this time she stood alone, staring into the dense tree line. No birdsong, no wind, not even a faint gut feeling. At 5:10 p.m., Laura called the police. That evening, a search team of 8 and 2 K9 units began sweeping the woods starting at the Ohanepekosh south entrance. They found boot prints in the fresh mud, matching David's hiking shoes. But the trail stopped at a bend near a shallow stream. No signs of slipping, no blood, no discarded gear. That night, Laura didn't sleep. She sat by the fireplace, watching the hands of the clock count minutes, as if each tick might pull David closer home. But no one returned, and somewhere in her mind a question took shape, one she didn't dare say aloud. If it wasn't an accident, then what was it? Day 3 after David's disappearance. The search radius had expanded to nearly 20 square miles around the Ohanapikosh region. The search team grew to 16, with a helicopter scanning overhead. Still, nothing, until the end of the 4th day. That's when they found his backpack wedged between two slick boulders. It was retrieved using a safety hook. Inside, an empty water bottle, an unused first aid kit, a leather-bound notebook, and a Garmin GPS device, with the battery removed. Strangely, the battery was not inside the backpack. It wasn't found nearby either, even after the team swept the 20-meter radius with a metal detector. Laura was shown the backpack. Her breath caught when she saw the notebook. It was David's personal journal, one he'd carried since his residency, a place where he recorded his thoughts, emotions, and private reflections. A sort of self-therapy he'd maintained ever since the collapse of 7WOTC in 2001, where he had helped pull 2 survivors from the rubble. The final page was torn out, cleanly, not ripped in panic, but removed with care, as if someone needed only that page. On the 5th day, Laura went back to the trail herself. She brought her own notes, the trail maps David preferred, and a printed scan of the last prescription he'd written, dated March 2018, for a patient named Landon Frey. That confused her. David had retired in 2014. Why would he write a handwritten prescription 4 years later? And why on paper, when he'd used digital records since 2010? She returned to the spot where his boot prints were found. She combed through the terrain, retracing steps. Near a stone outcrop by the creek, just 12 paces from the last confirmed location, she spotted a small, black object lodged between 2 rocks, a fragment of a handheld civilian radio, rubber-coated. It wasn't David's. She turned it in. The serial number had been scratched off, but what mattered was the placement, not somewhere it could have dropped naturally. It was tucked in, under a canopy, deliberately or accidentally during observation. That night, Laura sat alone in the cabin. She reopened David's old records, scanning through patients he had seen after retirement. Most were friends, neighbors, familiar names, except one, Douglas Reiner. No address, no insurance ID, just a line of notes. Sleep issues, hyperreactive to sound. Avoid contact after 5 p.m. Do not ask about former residents. Another note, scrawled in the margin, with no date. Doug followed me after that evening. Think he knows I recorded. Not sure. Laura's hands trembled. For the first time, their log cabin, the place they'd lived for 20 years, no longer felt safe. She didn't sleep that night, because for the first time, she realized David hadn't just gone missing. He might have been taken. 2 weeks after David disappeared, the official search was downgraded. No body, no new clues. The press moved on, but Laura didn't. She took the note mentioning Douglas Reiner to Virginia Mason Hospital in Seattle, where David had worked for over 2 decades. Her goal? To confirm whether Reiner had ever been a legitimate patient. The records team searched for more than 2 hours. The result? No record of anyone named Douglas Reiner inpatient or outpatient. No file, no appointment history, no insurance data. Maybe it's a spelling error? They asked. Laura shook her head. No. He wrote it exactly that way. That evening, at home, Laura opened her laptop and began digging. Through online public records, she found one match. Douglas C. Reiner, formerly of Yelm, Washington, about 40 miles from Enumclaw. The profile was sparse. No marriage, no kids, no listed job. But one detail made her sit upright. In 2009, Douglas had been detained for stalking a gynecologist in Spokane. No charges filed. Reason: insufficient evidence of direct threat. Laura kept searching. In an old nurse support form for handling dangerous patients, she found a 2011 anonymous post. There was a guy went by, Doug came to our private clinic in Tacoma, pretended to be a PTSD patient, but all he wanted to know was how serotonin meds worked. Another user replied, "Creepy guy." Came back once, asked, "If someone knew your secret, what would you do about it?" Laura printed everything. She contacted Dr. Eliza Nguyen, David's former colleague at a mental health clinic in Auburn. Eliza didn't hesitate. Doug came here around 2013, never gave his real last name, always wore sunglasses indoors. I refused to keep seeing him after session 3. Why? He mentioned David. Laura's breath caught. He asked me, did David Harrison ever talk about what happened in 2004? David had never mentioned anything strange to her about that year. But at home, she opened a drawer beneath the stairs, where David kept old files, fragments of abandoned journals. Inside, she found a thick envelope. No name. It held an autopsy report for a woman named Miriam Lockley, deceased in 2004. Cause: apparent suicide by antidepressant overdose. But David had scribbled a note on the final page. Doesn't appear voluntary. Eyes open, no reflex. Elbow hyperflexed. Recommend preserving audio from 914 Consult. Tape to the back, a mini cassette, unlabeled. Laura's hands trembled. David had kept evidence, and Doug might have known. It took Laura nearly 2 days to find a working cassette player from a second-hand shop in Auburn. She cleaned the tape, flipped it over, inserted it, and pressed play. A few seconds of static. Then David's voice, slow, careful, like he was reading aloud for his own clarity. September 14th, 2004. Patient: Miriam Lockley. Age: 32. History of chronic depression. Previously treated with sertraline. Follow-up after self-harm incident in June. A pause. Then the faint voice of a woman. Hesitant, shaky, almost inaudible at times. I don't remember that night. I woke up with scratches on my arm. I remember someone saying my name. But the room was so dark. David's voice followed, calm but intent. Has anyone been staying with you overnight recently? A long silence. No, or if so, I wasn't told. Toward the end of the tape, Miriam whispered one final sentence. Someone listens to me sleep. The recording clicked off. Laura sat frozen. Days later, she brought the autopsy report and the cassette to a private forensic consultant, a former colleague of David's. He reviewed the toxicology, reread the death summary, and after a long pause said, "The drug levels are high, yes, but the arm flexure and open eyes don't match a voluntary overdose, and non-dilated pupils, that's not normal. Miriam's death might not have been suicide. David may have been the first to see through it, and he may have been silenced." Laura reviewed David's employment timeline. Shortly after the Miriam case, he transferred to a satellite clinic. 3 years later, early retirement. No explanation. She visited Miriam's last known address in Tacoma. The home was abandoned. Neighbors barely remembered her, except one, who recalled a man with gray hair and sunglasses who parked outside at night, regularly. The description matched Douglas Reiner. Laura pulled an archived driver's license photo from 2007, and there he was. Same man from an old medical board photo of David and his team, standing at the far end, not looking at the camera. From a patient with no file, Doug was now connected to a suspicious death, and possibly to David's disappearance. Laura sent all the documents to the Pierce County Sheriff's Office. 3 days later, she received a formal reply. Request denied. Insufficient evidence to open a criminal investigation. The tape was inadmissible. No confirmed speaker identity. She didn't stop. Laura posted the full story anonymously to a private medical network, including the tape, the autopsy scans, and her findings. A week passed. Then a single message appeared in her inbox from a former records clerk at a Spokane clinic. I was ordered to destroy Miriam Lockley's file in 2005, but I kept a copy because she wasn't the only one. The scanned file from the former records clerk was 47 pages thick, blurry, watermarked, faded in places. The cover bore no name, only a reference number, SPC 04. The first page matched what Laura already had, the intake form for Miriam Lockley. But what made her breath hitch wasn't on the first page, it was at the end. An unmarked appendix, no title, no notes, just a list of 9 names, each followed by 4 columns: age, date of last treatment, attending physician, and internal summary. 5 names listed Dr. D. Harrison as the attending physician. The others named different doctors, but each internal note ended with the same phrase: suicide, conclusion contested, not to be disclosed. Laura scanned the names. Some she recognized. One was a former administrative assistant from David's clinic. Another was the wife of a PTSD patient who had died in 2001. The 7th name stunned her: Deborah Ellis. Nurse, deceased 2006. Cause, self-immolation in garage. Deborah had worked with David in 2003. Laura remembered her well, outspoken, meticulous, always clashing with clinic management over how prescriptions were stored and tracked. Laura searched archived news reports. Deborah's death had indeed made headlines. Nurse dies in tragic suicide, but quickly vanished from follow-up coverage. She aligned the death dates. From 2004 to 2010, 1 person per year had died, each either a patient or staff member tied to inconclusive cases. None had received full autopsies, no public inquiry, no known objections from family, or if there had been, they were ignored. Each death was a full stop. Laura met again with Eliza Nguyen, the only medical ally she had left. She showed her the list. Eliza read it slowly, quietly, until her eyes paused. "Do you think David knew about all of this?" Laura nodded. He didn't just know, he kept evidence. Eliza pointed at one name, Rachel L. Nye. Died 2008, official cause, bridge jump. "I treated Rachel. She had no history of severe depression. At our last session, she said she'd filed a formal complaint about medication theft. 3 days later, she was dead." Laura photographed the list. She sent it to Samuel Reed, an investigative journalist known for his exposé on medical abuse in Oregon. At first, he was skeptical, but when she handed him the autopsy reports, the cassette, and the names, his tone changed. "I always suspected something, but no one ever dared bring up Harrison. Some called him the one doctor who never bent. If he vanished, it wasn't by accident." Samuel began a parallel investigation. 2 weeks later, he called back. "You need to hear this. One of the victims, Deborah Ellis, called the police 3 days before her death. The call wasn't logged in the public record, but the internal recording survived. She said one thing: 'They know I know. If I don't live to see tomorrow, find Harrison.'" Laura said nothing. She stared at her husband's name. The man who saved lives. The man who documented what others ignored. The man who refused to stay silent. And now he was gone. His name among the dead no one dared to examine. Using the list of 9 names, Samuel began mapping connections. He traced each individual back to their clinics, doctors, and last known points of contact. The result shocked even Laura. 8 out of 9 had, at some point, been treated at the same private institution, Riverview Behavioral Health Systems, based in Seattle. Riverview wasn't high profile, but it belonged to a network of centers focused on neurological functional disorders, a vaguely defined but insurance-eligible category. Samuel located Riverview's original license from 1993. The founder wasn't a physician, but a financier named Caleb H. Durham, former CFO of 2 major pharmaceutical firms in California. Durham initially owned 48% of the company, but after 2001, his name vanished. No resignation, no sale, just gone. Laura remembered something David once said in 2001 about refusing to co-sign an internal investment for research into peripheral neurological responses in controlled environments. When she asked for details, he'd simply said, "That wasn't medicine, that was control." Samuel tracked down a former Riverview accountant from 2009. After several ignored messages, she finally agreed to meet, under one condition: no recording, no real names. In a faded motel off the highway, the woman, about 50, wearing a dull silver bracelet, slid them a stack of papers. "I kept these because I knew something was off, especially the 2004 ledger." One page showed that the Riverview had transferred $126,000 for auxiliary research to a shadow entity called the Onyx Trust, registered in Nevada, and then Samuel saw the note that stopped him cold. Oversight Contact, D. Harrison. Handwritten, not typed. Laura's pulse spiked. David had never mentioned this, and she knew if his name was on it, he hadn't added it. Someone had used it to legitimize something else. They traced the Onyx Trust through shell companies and offshore accounts, eventually uncovering the man behind it all, Caleb H. Durham, alive, living in a lakeside estate in Flathead, Montana, under his daughter's name. Samuel sent an interview request. No reply. 3 days later, Laura received an envelope. No return address, no postage. Just her name scrawled across the front. Inside, a single photo. Grainy, infrared. Laura, sitting at her desk at night, reading papers, shot from outside her window. No sound, no footsteps, but someone had been there. Watching. And in that moment, one thought echoed in her mind. David tried to stop it. Now it's my turn. October 2022. Laura arrived in Flathead, Montana beneath a gray, wind-cut sky. She rented a secluded cabin near the water, far from the nearest road. In her bag were the remnants of everything David had left behind: the cassette tape, the list of 9 dead, forensic reports, and the scanned financial documents linking Riverview to a hidden operation. Durham's estate stood alone on a rocky slope above the lake. Steel gates, no signage, no surveillance, designed to keep people away. Laura didn't approach the door. She waited, parked 200 meters away, watching, documenting. For 3 days, nothing happened. On the 4th afternoon, a black SUV rolled up the driveway. An older man stepped out, silver hair, upright posture, eyes fixed on the trees. Laura exited her car without a word. He didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. She followed him to a small wooden outbuilding at the lake's edge. Inside, the room was bare, 2 chairs and an unopened bottle of whiskey. No one drank, no small talk. Laura laid her documents on the table, turned them to the page bearing Deborah Ellis's name. Durham barely looked. No shock, no denial. His face was as unchanged as it had been in those 1994 shareholder photographs. Still, expressionless, impervious. Without prompting, he confirmed everything. Riverview had funneled money into a neurobehavioral surveillance program disguised as long-term therapy. PTSD patients were used as live models under unregistered protocols. Some doctors signed on willingly. David was the only one who refused. But his name appeared anyway, forged onto documents, used to legitimize financial and data transfers. When David realized this, he began collecting evidence in secret: voice recordings, printouts, appointment logs altered after the fact. He sent 3 copies to 3 people. None survived. A journalist killed in a traffic accident. A doctor who vanished. A lawyer who fell off a bridge in the rain. None of the incidents were investigated longer than 48 hours. Before disappearing, David sent a final audio file directly to Durham, not as a warning, but as leverage. If anything happened to him, Durham would be exposed. Durham kept the file and kept his distance. Now, in silence, he reached into the desk and retrieved a small USB drive wrapped in black felt. He placed it on the table. No conditions, no threats. Laura picked it up. No questions. She knew this object could shift the foundation, not just of David's disappearance, but of everything hidden beneath 2 decades of medical silence. As she left the cabin, she glanced back once. No goodbye. Durham stood motionless, eyes on the lake, and in that stillness, Laura understood. David had not been killed. He had disappeared, to protect the evidence, to trade his safety for truth, and to give her the chance to finish what he couldn't. Laura left Montana under the cover of night, without stopping or speaking to anyone. She checked into a small, anonymous motel room in Spokane and unpacked the USB. The drive wasn't encrypted, but it didn't contain standard files. Inside was a nested structure of folders named with patient codes, timestamps, and cryptic titles like PTSD Type BR Reaction Log, Synthetic Sequence 3 Variation, Voice Trigger Session 6. 26 folders, each holding between 3 to 11 files, mostly audio recordings, PDFs, and behavioral response charts. Every file opened a door into something no one was meant to see. Audio logs detailed patients placed in isolation, subjected to subliminal sound tests, strobing light stimuli, and altered biorhythmic cycles. One report read, "Subject reacted violently to replayed voice of family member. Recorded heart rate spike of 27%, elevated BP, followed by brief syncope." Laura paused multiple times while reviewing. Some recordings were labored breathing, metal dragging, and at the end, a clinical voice, not David's, reading stats like they were handling objects, not humans. One folder was titled Harrison Review Logs. Inside were scanned PDFs of David's handwritten notes, observations, counter-arguments, and, finally, a single closing line dated March 8, 2009. "They're not measuring to heal. They're measuring to see how long a person lasts when no one believes them." She sat still, breath caught. This wasn't fear, it was structure, architecture. And David, all those years, hadn't just been a physician. He had been a last witness to a trial no jury would ever hear. Laura knew it had to go public. But how? The mainstream press wasn't enough. The authorities, dangerous. Every agency that once touched David's work had either gone silent or erased its own trail. Then she remembered a whistleblower organization, a decentralized data archive run from Iceland, outside standard jurisdiction. She contacted them. They responded in 36 hours, providing encryption protocol and requiring the data be broken into 18 compressed segments before upload. Laura worked for 3 days straight. No sleep, no interruptions. When the final upload completed, a single message appeared. Data received. Prepare for fallout. 3 days later, the documents went live across underground media forums, labeled the Harrison Files. At first, just PDFs and audio clips. Within a week, thousands were resharing them, with experts analyzing each layer. Some audio files were waveform matched against known neurological triggers. A German research center confirmed they'd once rejected a similar proposal in 2007. A Canadian doctor came forward, admitting David had warned him, but he'd stayed silent. No official investigation began, but the international media surged. And David Harrison's name returned, not with missing, but with the man who proved medicine cannot be used as a weapon of silence. Laura knew it wasn't over, but she also knew the box had been opened, and no one would ever close it again. 3 months after the Harrison Files went public, Laura left Washington. She gave no interviews. She didn't appear on television. She refused every offer from media companies wanting to monetize the story. She left behind only one message to Samuel Reed. The files belong to everyone. David never wanted credit. Just don't let it vanish again. News outlets kept digging. Politicians called for inquiries. A few clinics were audited, but Laura understood. David hadn't exposed this to punish. He'd exposed it to prevent. No court was large enough to try an entire system. What mattered was that people now knew, especially those who had never realized they were victims. She settled in a small rental cottage in Oregon, alone. She kept a garden by the woods, read old books, and occasionally received letters from people who had once known David, a former patient, a nurse who passed him in a hallway. All shared the same memory. He listened longer than necessary. One early spring afternoon, she found an unmarked envelope in her mailbox. Inside, a blurry black-and-white photo, shot from a distance. A man in a cloth hat, bent over a patch of white daisies. His face obscured, but the hands, the slope of the shoulders, unmistakable. No note, no return address. But the paper type was unique to a photo lab in Idaho, the one David used long ago. Laura told no one. She slipped the photo into an old book between two blank pages. Later that year, a coalition of human rights lawyers filed a class action suit against several private medical institutions, using the Harrison files as their foundation. David Harrison's name wasn't listed as a plaintiff. It wasn't listed as a witness. But every lawyer involved knew. Without him, there would be no case. In Samuel Reed's final article before retiring, he wrote, "David Harrison didn't vanish. He simply stepped beyond our field of vision. Like anyone who's lived too long inside the truth, he knew that for the truth to live, the storyteller sometimes has to disappear first." Laura stayed in that cottage. No cameras, no locked gates. Each morning she tended the garden. Each night, she read a page from David's old journals. On the final page, a faded line still legible. "Don't let them teach you to forget. Memory isn't for comfort. It's for the keep." Gee, det är så det står.